So when you saw this, what was some things you noticed right off the bat?
On the right, there's a worker that has
Yeah, I mean, first off, if you it's what they usually do is they have one side represents labor or like those labor unions specifically, and the other side is going to be is going to be considered like the capitalist or the industrialist, right? And then you look at the right here, just look at the person here, right? Has no shoes, has got like a tiny hammer. The horse looks like about to die, like exhausted. Not really any armor whatsoever. And then who's he going up against? Well, I meant like this guy's a little guy, the little horse, versus like gold armor. Literally, there's no horse; it's literally a train, like the railroad itself. And then if you take a look closely here, it really says Monopoly, right? It basically is kind of showing that there is a big difference between the two. Okay, now, on top of that, what else would you see? Yeah, Miranda. Yeah, so when you look at, right, this is like basically the people in the background, right? All the industrialists are backed by the government, they're backed by a smaller group of people. And then you look at the other side, these are all laborers, these are all people, the workers themselves are backing the labor union. So it's kind of showing that there's definitely a split in society of who's supporting who. But guarantee you can see the resources are completely different, right? That's like the big thing you need to take away from this. So the two questions here, first one is, what symbolism do you see in the cartoon? What is the historical context of this cartoon? So what would you say for this first one? Yeah, right. The gold armor, it's gold, right? If it was just armor, then you say clearly they're strong, but it's gold armor. So it's saying that the money is giving them so much more of an advantage, right, compared to the laborer. And so the historical context. What's the historical context of this? It's pretty straightforward.
like there's like monopolies were basically oppressing workers in the factory system.
Yeah, I mean, like that. At the end of the day, I mean, it's straightforward. It's just kind of giving a background of the fact that the all the industries, the businesses were highly resourceful, and they were kind of oppressing labor unions in many different ways. We talked about the different methods, the tactics that were used to suppress labor unions. And they always had those altercations. We talked about three specific examples where those altercations got pretty violent yesterday. But yeah, I mean, that's the kind of the background of why this cartoon was made. And then lastly, what is the message of the cartoon? What is the artist trying to portray or convey to the readers? What's the message here?
The labor unions have like the support of the common people. They have more support, but they can't really do much. The government
Yeah, the fact is, you can just tell by the background that the people support labor unions, right? All these people in the background are cheering for them. The problem is that they don't have the resources to necessarily even compete, to even be close to fighting against these industrialists, because not only are they rich themselves, but the government supports them too. So it's just the resources are not even close, right? And that's kind of the big thing we take away from these interactions between the two. Okay. Good. So what we'll do is now kind of transition into the next part. Let me just hide this stuff here. We're going to be, like I mentioned, kind of just summarizing the strikes that we talked about yesterday, and then going into immigration and how that's going to be really the not only mass immigration, but also the reaction to immigration. Okay. So we talked about three specific events. The first one was the Haymarket bombing. I'm not going to go too deep into this because we did the activity yesterday. But the reality is, in Chicago, basically there was this event where the Knights of Labor had amassed a very large group to try to have a protest against the harsh conditions in which the workers were facing. And what ends up happening is the government ends up sending officers to tell them to break up the protest. At the same time, there were some anarchists that showed up and set off basically a bomb. All of a sudden, hell broke loose. People started to die. I mean, it was a mass altercation. And then this got worse. Now, the Knights of Labor end up losing a lot of their popularity, and basically people leave because of the fact that this event happened. So when we did the activity yesterday talking about the Haymarket bombing, the Haymarket riot, it goes with the idea that the media and the government turned on the labor union. Okay. The Homestead strike, this was going with Carnegie's steel plant right outside of Pittsburgh. Okay, now this one is very famous. If you ever seen the show Men Who Built America, it's basically a series that talks about the biggest industrialists of America and each kind of background story about them. And when you talk about Carnegie, this is a big event for Carnegie. Now, Carnegie, the interesting thing about this event is that Carnegie's a nice guy, but he's a very harsh businessman. So what ends up happening, he hires Frick, who is the general manager of this plant, to basically deal with the issue of the labor union. Now, Frick is kind of a messed up dude, right? And what he does, he ends up hiring a group of thugs known as the Picker guards, the Pinkertons, the guards. Basically, these are mercenaries that will do anything for money. And he hires these people to basically break up this union, this strike. Ends up getting very violent, ends up basically fighting all day long. People get killed. And basically, it first off turns on Carnegie, like the media kind of turns on Carnegie, but then it turns back when there ends up becoming more death on the other side, as in the workers end up looking worse in the long run. So same thing, same theme here. The workers themselves lose a lot of momentum, a lot of popularity because of the fact that the media and government turned against them and their movement. But this was still a stain on Carnegie because Carnegie felt very responsible for what happened. And then last one was the Pullman strike. Now, this is going along with the railroads. This is a pretty big deal because basically the strike had halted all railroads from working, right? And Matt, I kind of made the example of yesterday saying that it's like when you turn off the railroads, it's like turning off the internet. Imagine there was a strike that turned off the entire internet of the country. Like hell would go loose. And because this is so important, it turns off all transferring of people and also of trade. So this is a big deal. They end up sending the government to go and break up this strike. It kind of looks really bad on the labor union itself, and they kind of lose a lot of their popularity because of it. So all of these three events kind of show that the labor unions at the time do not gain what they desire. Now, not saying that this doesn't lead into future events if they gain their better working conditions, but right now it doesn't really do so. Only during the progressive era does that really happen. Okay, and we'll talk about the progressive era as we get to the next unit specifically. But now we're going to go into the next part, right? As I mentioned before, the Gilded Age, this unit kind of covers four major things that are happening at the same time, right? As all the industrialization is happening, as the mass migration out westward is happening, mass immigration from overseas is occurring. Okay, and this is going to change American cities forever, specifically when it comes to new cultures are entering in, and also the competition for work. Okay, so just to kind of set the stage for you, basically this section is just going to cover immigration and its impact on the cities, and I kind of mentioned that already. But instead of America becoming more a farming nation, it becomes a nation of city dwellers, and that's a big transition. Remember, we used to always talk about how Thomas Jefferson, Andrew Jackson were all like big farming. Let's keep the America like a farming nation. That's not going to happen ever again, right? And that kind of ties into what we talked about in the first part, where farming out westward was so difficult that a lot of people left and went back into the cities. So now you're getting this concept known as urbanization. Basically, the idea of everyone flooding into the cities and the cities get bigger and bigger and bigger. That's what urbanization means. So we're going to start seeing this on a larger scale. And this is happening not only because people out westward are moving back into the cities, or even people in the south are moving into the northern cities, but immigration overseas is heading into the cities as well. When you take a look at just how the population triples in a 50-year span, right? It's just kind of crazy. All right. So what ends up happening, the reason why immigration occurs are basically these two types of factors. The push factors, which basically means negative factors that leading people to leave their nation, and pull factors, positive events or positive factors that pull people in, All right, so there are two different types. So the first one, the push factors, which are obviously the negative things that are happening in Europe, basically poverty, mass population in Europe is causing a lot of people to not have enough money, enough work to really have anything to survive out in Europe. So what they say is we should leave, move to United States, start anew, start fresh. And that's what causes a lot of people to leave, right? And then obviously religious persecution. This happens on a wide scale in Europe because a lot of the times it's mainly about being Protestant or being a specific type of Catholic religion, where if you're not that type of religion, you get persecuted. So a lot of those people leave to come to the United States, which is a lot more open about being a different type of religion. Now, granted, it's not perfect back then, but it's still better than what was going on in Europe at the time. And some of the pull factors, obviously, the countries having a reputation of having religious and political freedom, also having opportunity when it comes to the cities, and even if you want to go farm, you could if you want to try, right? This is different than what Europe is. You know, obviously you go like, let's just say Britain, for instance. Britain is so condensed in an island with so many people living there that, you know, every town and city is just overpopulated. The United States is more open, right? We're a growing nation still. So obviously it's a lot more opportunity to go there. And obviously with advances in technology, like with the steamboats and stuff, travel is a lot more cheaper. So during this time, it makes it easier for someone to try to start anew somewhere else, right? So these are all different push and pull factors that kind of lead into this mass migration into the United States. Now, there's going to be difference between old immigrants and newer immigrants. And the old immigrants are really were the group of people that were migrating before this mass migration during the Gilded Age. And the old immigrants basically would be considered the British, German, Irish, and those from Denmark, right? And these are people that would have been migrating for many, many years, right? And these people came from more Protestant backgrounds, so they kind of transitioned, you know, pretty well. And they all usually started out with being farmers in the beginning, right? Because they usually came during a time where farming was a bigger deal. But from the 1890s into the 1920s, we started to see immigration start from the new immigrants. And these new immigrants started to come from different parts of Europe, more from Eastern Europe. So those were Italians, Greeks, Russians, those from Poland, right? They all started migrating into the United States, and they obviously were different aspects of religions. A lot of them were mainly Roman Catholic, Greek Orthodox Christians, Russian Orthodox, and those that are Jewish, all started to now migrate. And a lot of times they were going into the cities. Okay, they usually were not farmers. They usually migrated into these mass city areas. And they all spoke diverse languages. Now, obviously, the difference between the old immigrants, you know, usually a lot of times had, English was one of the main languages, and also German. But now new immigrants have really different languages. So now it's a little more difficult to transition into American society. So you're going to see a big difference between the two. And this is basically just showing graphs of what I just kind of mentioned here. Now, because of this mass migration, a lot of people started to try to really limit the amount of immigration happening. We kind of talked about the Chinese Exclusion Act, right? And that was during the time when the railroads were being developed out westward because of so many Chinese immigrants being used for labor back then. That was one example. We start to see really an increase in that because a lot of people started to look at new immigrants as being undesirables because they saw them being different, more different than the old immigrants, which were, remember, Irish, English, German, and they were more closely tied to those, the Americans that were already living there. So these new immigrants were seen as being outsiders or undesirables, and they wanted to try to stop them from coming in. And we saw the emergence of these societies or these groups that were like nativist in origin. Remember the nativism and the idea where it's like we rather care about the people that are already here than care about immigrants. Remember I did the whole they took our jobs in the South Park thing. That's what nativism kind of is, and it really starts out with being that type of that idea that because of these new immigrants coming in, they're competing for jobs in the cities. So they really wanted to halt or stop immigration because of that purpose, and they really were using all different means to try to explain why they were doing this, right? So they had that idea of nativism. They also tried to use attempts of using social Darwinism, which is none of the same thing that the business owners had used, saying that they're inferior to us, which is why we are, we are better and we deserve the jobs over them because, because of some weird idea about that. So they tried to do this for all different reasons. But because of this, basically this mass migration, this mass industrialization going on, we see changes in our cities, right? Cities become, instead of it being built out wider and wider, cities start to be built up taller and taller, which is why Carnegie kind of was like perfect, right? They needed steel to make things like skyscrapers and things like these new types of buildings that were never before seen, right? And the fact is, with that happening, with mass immigration, farmers leaving the South and West to come to these cities were the place to be, right? That was the place where the most opportunity was available to you. And we started to see cultures kind of being developed in all these different areas. All right, so let's get started with the immigration worksheet, the cartoon worksheet, which is actually pretty straightforward. What we're going to be doing basically is you're going to be analyzing different cartoons. And this is important because the cartoons themselves are going to be focused on showing the perspective of how most Americans felt at the time of these new immigrants coming into the country. And it's going to be pretty interesting, but pretty messed up at the same time. And the reason why I say messed up is because a lot of these cartoons aren't really positive towards immigrants. All right, so let's take a look at that. It's here. Okay, so if you take a look, what ends up happening is I actually link the different cartoons through to a Google Doc. Okay, so when you click on this, and I'll show you, click on this link and sends you to this separate worksheet. The first part of it is going to give you a timeline of basically different immigration laws that were passed to try to stop immigration from happening. So as you go through this, you should look at the timeline to see what's going on at that same time to kind of give you a sense of some historical context, right? And let's just say that you were given, and I'll put this on split screen so you can see what I'm talking about. Let's just say I assign your group cartoon number 1. What you're going to do is go down to cartoon number 1, where it says where the blame lies, right? So that means you're looking at this cartoon, okay? And you're going to answer the questions that go with it, right? If you have cartoon 2, you're going to go to cartoon 2, do the same thing, cartoon 3, cartoon 3, and then cartoon 4, cartoon 4. So we're going to try to do is get through all the cartoons, and then you're going to answer the last part, which is the closer, okay, which is going to kind of summarize all the different cartoons when you talk to one another about it, right? So let's do 3 groups, and we'll do the 4th cartoon together, okay? So get in your groups now, and then I'll assign you your cartoon. All right, so those in breakout rooms, I will I'll do 3 groups and we'll do the same thing, right? So room 1 is going to do the cartoon 1, room 2 is going to do the cartoon 2, and room 3 is going to do cartoon 3. Okay. So up front, do cartoon 1, second group, do cartoon 2, third group, do cartoon 3. Sounds about right. So make sure you look at the date in which the cartoon was made, and then look at the timeline to help you with historical context, right? So it should be pretty quick to finish your cartoon because there's only really 2 questions, but just really look at it. So how are we doing? We gonna finish? Okay, so let me move these people back in their rooms. Okay. So what we're gonna do now is I want you to we're gonna go through each cartoon and we're gonna talk about what we found in for your group's cartoons, and then we'll move on to the fourth one together, right? For those in Zoom, what we'll do is I'll put you in a breakout room or larger breakout room to discuss what you guys found. Just so at least we're on the same page. So let's start with let me just wait until everyone's out of the breakout room before we begin so they can discuss theirs. But group one up here, you did the first one, which was a place, it was it called it says where the blame lies, right? Which is a really important thing to look at, the titles, right, of your cartoons, because they give you a sense of what the kind of the message and what they're trying to portray, right? And that's kind of the first one. And let me just wait until this is finished so I can put them in their other rooms. Great. Rooms. All right, so let's talk about where the blame lies. So group number one, let's see what you got. What'd you say here?
So, if they do immigration that in the cartoon, it's not a new wave of immigrants that are mainly from Asia and other European countries. The struggle context is labor laws and immigration laws that are restricting immigration.
Good. Okay.
And for the symbols in the cartoon, it said that the message of the cartoon is that the new wave of immigrants are willing to be radical and want to change America. And Uncle Sam, representing America, has to stop.
Good. Now, were there some other things you noticed that were interesting to you when you guys looked at this?
There's a list at the bottom left. It was talking about it. It has the mafia on it, and then it has New Orleans, anarchists in Chicago, and the social.
Yeah, so that's like something that's very, very small, but it does mean a lot in what the cartoon is trying to portray here, right? He's basically saying that these new waves of immigrants are starting these groups, right, out in different cities. Because what ends up happening that's really important is new immigrants start to migrate into cities and actually create their own subsections of these cities. Like for instance, like in Italy, like Italians coming into New York City create Little Italy, Arthur Avenue, basically is a plethora of Italians living in specific parts of New York City, right? Chinatown, same thing, right? You see all these different aspects in all major cities across the United States where a lot of new immigrants start to go into specific areas. And they're trying to kind of claim that, in New Orleans, there'll be a mafia in New Orleans, and there'll be anarchists in Chicago. There'll be socialists in New York, right? And these are big due to these new immigrants coming in, right? And that's kind of one of the big things. So obviously the message, you guys already mentioned it, was that these new immigrants will be drastically changing America, right? In different ways, okay? And that's why they kind of say where the blame lies, right? They're trying to blame it on these new immigrants. Let's look now at cartoon number 2, looking backward. So which group did? All right, so let's talk about this one.
And the rich Americans are not allowing the poor living immigrants to enter the U.S. And the historical context is the discriminatory immigration laws that existed in the Gilded Age and even though like they were immigrants too.
Yeah, I think that's like the most interesting part of it. I think the fact is like all these rich industrialists are like blocking, right? Immigrants are coming here saying, you're only bringing, bad things. We don't want to pay for, your refuge or anything. And in the background, it has like shadows of they were the immigrants coming to America when they needed refuge and they made something bigger themselves, right? That's like the interesting aspect of this. Is there anything else you guys want to talk about on this one?
It's like the symbols because like the wealthy Americans all have shadows behind them of like the immigrant self, showing that they were once immigrants too, but like they now seek to keep immigrants out of America. And, like the overall message is that they're being hypocritical.
Yeah, I mean that's the big thing, being hypocrite. But yeah, Miranda. Good, exactly. Good. Any other questions on this one? Let's now move to cartoon number 3, the hyphenated American, right? So group number 3, what did you say for this one? Good. That's good. What did you say for symbolism? The next part. Yeah. No, good. And this one's not the easiest one to really understand because it doesn't give you enough stuff to really make insinuations. You kind of have to just like look at it and be like, I think this is what it's talking about, right? That's why the difference between the last two gives you a lot more symbolism. This one is a lot more difficult to kind of connect everything to. But it's still a good one. But with the last few minutes, let's talk about number 4. Okay. Now, number 4, the title is Columbia's Unwelcome Guests. All right. This one has a lot of symbolism. Okay. There's a lot of stuff here. So look at this one. All right. Now, there's a few things that I like to point out. Right. First off, what's the first thing you see? All right off the bat. Yeah. First things first, right in the middle, you have Columbia, which is representing America, is having attack dogs that are stopping the immigrants from coming in. And unfortunately, it's hard to see here. It says law and order. That's what the dogs represent. Law and order. Okay. So that's for number 1. What else do you see? Yeah, there's a lot of obviously like some messed up depictions of immigrants here, right? When you take a look at it. And one of the other things I noticed right in the background, and it might be hard to see, where are these immigrants coming from? Sewers. They're coming from like sewage drains, right? And each of them has a different label: Germany, Russia, Italy, right? So they're clearly looking at immigrants as being like lower humans, okay? And they're entering the United States, and all of a sudden, law and order has to be sicked on them to make sure that they keep out, right? And then we take a look here, we'll try to see, it says Liberty Hall, Liberty not licensed, and it has basically everyone else in America kind of sitting in the courthouse, kind of eating and sitting in a restaurant, right? So it's kind of like basically when you look at this one, what do you see? Like what's the symbolism that you connect with the message here? Yeah, Aaron. Yep. Yeah, threaten liberty, right? Clearly, this is not a positive message towards immigrants, right? You can definitely see that in a lot of different ways with the sewage drains and the depictions of these immigrants being like subhuman, right? There's a lot of different things you can point to, okay? So unfortunately, we didn't have enough time to really thoroughly go into this cartoon, but that's the general information, okay? So yeah, I think that's pretty good. We did a good job today. We went through a lot of stuff. Okay. So I think the only thing left is I'll do the closer here. And I posted an ed puzzle that talks about just the restrictions on immigration, how many history. I think it's like 6 minutes long, something like that. So it's really not that crazy. It'll kind of cover some of the points I talked about today. So it shouldn't be too bad. All right. So if you have any questions, please let me know. And good job today. Have a good day. Yeah, have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Have a good day.